The polished mahogany of the boardroom table felt as cold as the space between them. Liam held the pen, a cheap plastic thing provided by the notary, its lightness a stark contrast to the weight of the document beneath his hand. He could feel Isabel's eyes on him, a mixture of anxiousness and triumphant relief. She thought this was the final hurdle, the last piece of unpleasantness before she could have what she wanted. A husband who was handsome, compliant, and safely partitioned from the serious business of her family's wealth. Across from her, her father, Arthur Vance, leaned back in his leather chair, the very picture of patriarchal satisfaction. He had secured his legacy, insulated his empire from the potential grasp of a man he deemed a charming but ultimately insignificant addition to the family portrait. Isabel believed she was protecting her future. She was a woman of foresight, a pragmatist. This document, with its cold, clinical clauses, was a fortress she was building around her inheritance, around the life she had always known and intended to keep. She watched Liam's hand, waiting for the smooth, dark stroke of ink that would confirm his place in her world, a place she had carefully delineated. She loved him, she thought, but love was an emotion, wealth was a reality, and realities needed to be managed. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend in her world of polished surfaces and declared assets, was that the man sitting opposite her was not a guest about to enter her fortress. He was the architect of the very ground it was built on. Within minutes, the walls of her carefully constructed reality would not just be breached, they would be revealed as an illusion she had built for herself. The pen in Liam's hand was not signing away his future, it was uncapping the ink on hers. We love telling stories about the moments that change everything. If you love them too, and we hope you do, take a second to click that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales of dramatic reversals and hidden truths. We're always curious to know where our stories are reaching, so drop a comment and let us know what city or country you're watching from. Now, let's see how a simple signature can set off an earthquake no one saw coming. Their story had begun, as many do, with a spark of undeniable chemistry. They met at a gallery opening, a world Isabel navigated with the effortless grace of a native, and Liam observed with the keen eye of a man who understands structure. He was quiet, but his presence was solid, anchored. He didn't orbit the room like so many others, desperate to be seen. He stood near a monolithic steel sculpture, his gaze analytical, appreciative. Isabel, accustomed to being the center of any room's gravity, found herself drawn to his stillness. He spoke about the art not in terms of its market value, a language she was fluent in, but in terms of its spatial integrity, its relationship with the light, the way it forced a viewer to move around it. He was an architect, he explained, and he saw the world as a series of interconnected spaces. In those first few months, his quiet nature was a charming novelty. He listened more than he spoke, his attention a warm, focused beam that made her feel like the most fascinating person in the world. He seemed utterly unconcerned with her family name or the obvious markers of her wealth. He was impressed by her mind, her ambition as a senior vice president at her father's company, Vance Innovations. He found her beautiful, of course, but he told her it was her drive he admired most. For a woman who had often felt her identity was simply Arthur Vance's daughter, this was intoxicating. Liam saw her, or so she believed. The first crack in the facade appeared during a dinner at the Vance family estate, a sprawling mansion that seemed designed to remind visitors of their own inadequacy. It was a casual affair, just Liam, Isabel, and her parents, Arthur and Eleanor. Arthur, a man who measured others by their net worth and the prestige of their letterhead, had been circling the subject of Liam's career all evening. He did so with a veneer of polite interest that barely concealed his dismissive judgment. An architect, Arthur mused, swirling a Bordeaux that cost more than Liam's monthly rent. A noble profession, building things, tangible. I admire that. The word admire was delivered with the same tone one might use for a child's macaroni art. It must be gratifying to work with your hands, to create something from the ground up. A real salt-of-the-earth job. Liam smiled calmly, refusing to take the bait. There's some of that, but mostly it's about solving problems. How people live, how they work, how a building can shape their experience. It's more about psychology than it is about bricks and mortar. Isabel, sensing her father's condescension, tried to bridge the gap, but ended up reinforcing it. Liam is incredibly talented, Daddy. He designed a beautiful community library pro bono last year. The city even gave him a small award for it. She meant it as a compliment, but the emphasis on pro bono and small award only served to frame his work as a quaint hobby rather than a lucrative profession. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose contributions to conversations were usually limited to social arrangements and passive-aggressive compliments, chimed in. How lovely, dear. It's so important to give back, especially when one has the time. The implication hung in the air, that Liam's time was not particularly valuable. Liam's gaze remained steady. He didn't fidget, he didn't rush to defend himself. His right hand rested on the table, his fingers lightly touching the side of a sleek, matte black fountain pen he had placed beside his plate. It was a habit of his. He always had a quality writing instrument with him. To the Vances, it was just a pen. An expensive-looking one, perhaps, but a mere accessory. They couldn't know that the pen was a custom commission from Mont Blanc, a personal gift from a Qatari sheikh for whom Liam had just finished designing a private art museum in Doha. A project with a budget that could have purchased the Vance estate 3 times over. The pen was not an accessory, it was a trophy, a silent testament to a world of success they couldn't even conceive of him inhabiting. He simply nodded at Eleanor. I agree, giving back is its own reward. Later that night, as he drove Isabel home in his respectable but unremarkable sedan, she had tried to apologize for her father. Daddy can be a bit traditional, she'd said, touching his arm. He comes from a world where everything is about scale, mega mergers, global markets. He doesn't always appreciate the finer arts. He loves you. He's protective. I understand, Liam had replied, his voice even. But he understood more than she knew. He understood he was being weighed and measured, and that in the Vance family's ledger, he was coming up short. He saw the architecture of their relationship clearly. He was a decorative element, not a foundational one. And he knew, with a certainty that was as solid as reinforced concrete, that at some point they would try to formalize that status. He just had to be patient and wait for them to draw up the plans themselves. He would let them build their own prison of assumptions, brick by condescending brick. The wedding planning became a masterclass in Isabel's worldview. She saw their marriage not as a partnership to be built, but as an event to be produced, a testament to her family's status. Liam, who designed spaces for human connection, suggested a smaller, more intimate ceremony. A beautifully restored historical building downtown, perhaps, or a modern, light-filled venue that felt personal and warm. Isabel had dismissed the idea with a gentle, pitying laugh. Oh, darling, that's a sweet thought, but there are expectations. We have over 400 people on our primary list alone. My father's business associates, our family friends. We can't just stuff them into some little hall. We've already booked the grand ballroom at the Astoria. Every decision was a reflection of this logic. The caterer was chosen not for the quality of their food, but because they were the most expensive and exclusive in the city. The flowers were being flown in from Holland, a fact Isabel mentioned with casual pride. The band was a famous act that required a small army of technicians. Liam's input was listened to with a patient smile and then promptly ignored. His suggestions were treated as the quaint, uneducated opinions of a man who simply didn't understand the scale on which the Vances operated. He was a spectator at the planning of his own life. The most humiliating moment came during a budget meeting with Isabel and her mother. It was held in the Vances' sitting room, a space so immaculately decorated it felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on the lives of the wealthy. A spreadsheet was projected onto a large screen, detailing costs that made Liam's head spin, not because of the amounts, but because of the sheer frivolity. "Now, the finances," Eleanor said, her tone businesslike. "Obviously, Daddy and I will be handling the bulk of the expenses, but we thought it would be a lovely gesture for you to contribute something, Liam, to feel a part of it." Liam had prepared for this. He had a certified check in his jacket pocket. He had liquidated some stocks from a smaller, personal portfolio he kept for exactly this kind of occasion. It was a significant sum, enough to buy a small house in many parts of the country. He knew it was a test, a way for them to gauge his financial standing. He placed the check on the glass coffee table. "I've been saving for this. I want to contribute as much as I can." Eleanor picked it up, her perfectly manicured fingers holding it as if it were a curious artifact. She glanced at the number and then looked at Isabel. A silent, lightning-fast exchange passed between them. A flicker of pity, a hint of amusement. It was over in a second, but Liam saw it. It was the look of someone being handed a child's piggy bank to add to a corporate merger fund. Isabel leaned over and kissed his cheek, her voice laced with practiced sweetness. "Liam, that is so incredibly generous. Thank you. This is wonderful." She then turned to her mother. "This can cover the deposit for the string quartet for the cocktail hour, can't it, Mother?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, I think so. A perfect contribution. Thank you, Liam. It's the thought that counts." The dismissal was absolute. His life savings, a source of pride and a symbol of his hard work over many years, at least in the life he pretended to live, was relegated to a footnote in their grand production. He felt a flash of heat, a surge of anger that he quickly suppressed. Getting angry was reactive. It was what they expected. Instead, he channeled it into a cold, hard resolve. He simply nodded, his face a mask of calm acceptance. "I'm glad I could help." Later that week, the contrast between his two lives was never starker. In the world of the Vances, he was the charity case, the handsome fiancé with a heart of gold and pockets of lint. But in his real life, he was a titan. From his minimalist apartment, a space he'd chosen for its anonymity and quiet efficiency, he commanded a global enterprise. The Vances would have been shocked to see it. The apartment they pitied as the best he could afford was, in fact, one of a dozen properties he owned worldwide. It was his sanctuary of focus. One evening, while Isabel was at a late-night fitting for her custom-designed wedding gown, Liam was on a secure video conference with David Chen, his partner and the COO of their firm, Aethelred Architects. But Aethelred was more than an architectural firm. It was the public-facing arm of Aethelred Holdings, a private investment company Liam had founded a decade ago. It had started with his own earnings from a few massive projects in the Middle East and Asia, which he had strategically reinvested in undervalued tech and biotech companies. Now it was a behemoth. "The final tranche of shares was acquired this morning," David said, his face clear on the large monitor that dominated Liam's home office. Behind David, a bustling office of analysts could be seen, a stark contrast to Liam's quiet solitude. "We crossed the 51% threshold at 10:42 a.m. Eastern Time. We are now the majority shareholder of Vance Innovations. The board has been jittery all day. Rumors are flying, but no one knows it's us. They're expecting a hostile takeover from a competitor." Liam looked at the complex charts on his screen, streams of data that represented billions of dollars in assets. He was not the humble architect anymore. He was a commander surveying his battlefield. "And the board meeting?" "Scheduled for Friday morning," David confirmed. "Arthur Vance will be chairing it. He has no idea he's about to be formally introduced to his new boss." Liam's face was grim. "Keep everything under wraps until then. No press releases, no leaks. I want Mr. Vance to hear it from me personally." "Liam, are you sure about this?" David asked, his voice softening. David was more than a partner. He was Liam's oldest friend, the only person who knew the full story with Isabel. This is going to be brutal. Liam leaned back, his eyes distant. They are the ones who chose the terms of engagement, David. They've made it clear that our relationship is a transaction. They've assessed my value and found it wanting. I'm simply going to provide them with a more accurate valuation. He ended the call and walked over to his window, looking out at the city lights. He felt a profound sense of loneliness. He was a man living a double life, caught between the woman he thought he loved and the empire he had secretly built. The Vances saw him as a man in need of their wealth and status. The truth was, he had wanted none of it. He had only wanted Isabel, the woman he'd met at the gallery, the one whose mind he'd admired. But that woman seemed to have disappeared, replaced by an heiress obsessed with protecting herself from a threat that didn't exist. He had hoped she would see him, the real him. Now he knew she never would. She would have to be shown. The summons came on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week before the wedding. It was a call not from Isabel, but from Arthur Vance's personal assistant, a woman with a voice so crisp it could have cut glass. Mr. Vance requested Liam's presence at his office the following afternoon. The subject was pre-wedding financial formalities. Liam knew exactly what was coming. This was it. The moment they would lay their cards on the table, confident that he held a losing hand. He arrived at the headquarters of Vance Innovations the next day. The building itself was a monument to Arthur's ego, a soaring tower of black glass and steel that dominated the city's financial district. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of marble and quiet intimidation. Employees moved with a hushed reverence, their faces etched with the stress of high expectations. Liam's name was checked by a security guard who seemed unimpressed, his gaze lingering for a moment on Liam's simple, well-worn leather briefcase. He was an anomaly in this world of designer luggage and bespoke suits. Arthur's office was on the top floor, a cavernous space with a panoramic view of the city. It was less an office and more a throne room. Arthur was seated behind a desk the size of a small car, and in a chair to his left sat Isabel. She was dressed in a severe but elegant power suit, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked less like his fiancée and more like a junior member of a hostile negotiating team. She offered him a tight, nervous smile as he entered. "Liam, thank you for coming," Arthur began, his voice exuding a practiced, insincere warmth. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, placing Liam in the supplicant's position. "Please have a seat. We have a few things to discuss. Just some formalities to get out of the way before the big day." Isabel shifted in her chair. "It's standard practice, Liam, for a family with significant assets." Her voice was almost apologetic, but her eyes were firm. She was committed to this path. Arthur slid a thick, leather-bound document across the vast expanse of the desk. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. "This is a prenuptial agreement. Our family lawyers drew it up. It's fairly straightforward." Liam picked it up. He didn't open it immediately. He looked from Arthur to Isabel. "Is this what you want, Isabel?" She met his gaze, her own unwavering. "It's what's necessary. It's not about us. It's not about trust. It's business. It protects the family. It protects the company. It even protects you, in a way. It makes it clear that our marriage is about love, not money." The hypocrisy of the statement was breathtaking. She was claiming the document was proof their marriage wasn't about money, when its very existence was the ultimate proof that, to her and her father, it was about nothing but. Liam opened the folder. He read through the clauses with the same methodical calm he applied to a complex blueprint. The language was brutal, clinical, and deeply insulting. It wasn't just a standard prenup. It was a systematic stripping of any rights he might have. He would have no claim on any Vance family asset, present or future. He would have no claim on the appreciation of any asset during the marriage, even if his support at home enabled Isabel to advance her career. There was a particularly galling clause about intellectual property, stipulating that any idea or concept he developed during their marriage that could be of value to Vance Innovations would be the sole property of the company. They were trying to claim ownership of his very thoughts. He read for several minutes in complete silence. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the building's climate control system and the distant wail of a siren from the streets below. He could feel their anticipation, their tension. They were waiting for the explosion. They expected him to argue, to protest, to express his outrage and hurt. They were prepared for a fight, armed with condescending reassurances and unshakable resolve. Arthur finally broke the silence, leaning forward as if sharing a great secret. "Liam, I want you to understand, this isn't personal, it's just good business. The Vance family has built an empire over 3 generations. We have a responsibility to our shareholders, to our employees, to protect it from any potential complications. I'm sure a practical man like yourself can understand the necessity." Isabel added her own carefully rehearsed line. "Of course he understands, Daddy. Liam isn't with me for my money." It was a statement, but it landed like a question, a final test of his character. She was daring him to prove her right by not fighting back. Liam closed the folder gently. He looked up, his expression unreadable. The quiet in the room stretched, becoming heavy. This was the moment, the quiet before the storm. He saw the smug certainty on Arthur's face and the nervous resolve in Isabel's. They believed they held all the power, that they were dictating terms to a man with no leverage. They had no idea that the silence was not his shock, but their judgment. He took a slow breath and gave them an answer they never anticipated. "Okay," he said, his voice perfectly level. "Where do I sign?" The shock in the room was a physical force. Isabel's perfectly composed face slackened, her eyes widening in disbelief. Arthur, who had been leaning forward in a posture of magnanimous power, involuntarily jerked back in his chair. They had been prepared for a storm of emotion, for arguments, for pleas. They were utterly unprepared for quiet compliance. Liam's easy agreement was more disorienting than any protest could have been. It short-circuited their entire strategy. You agree?" Isabel stammered, her voice a fraction of a pitch higher than usual. "Yes," Liam said simply. "You've said it's necessary to protect the family. You've said it's not personal. I believe you." Each word was delivered with a calm sincerity that was utterly unnerving. He was not acting like a man who had just been cornered. He was acting like a man granting a reasonable request. Arthur recovered more quickly, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He interpreted Liam's compliance as the predictable capitulation of a man who knew he had no other choice. He had wanted the girl, and this was the price of admission. Arthur had won. "Good man," he boomed, clapping his hands together once. "I knew you were sensible. I told you, Isabel, Liam's a practical fellow. He understands the way the world works." He was now overflowing with paternal bonhomie, the crisis averted, his power affirmed. "Well then, this calls for a drink. But let's get the ink dry first, shall we?" The official signing was arranged for 2 days later, on Friday morning. Not in a sterile lawyer's office, but at the Vance estate. It was another calculated power play, a ceremony of submission staged in the heart of their empire. It was scheduled just before the wedding rehearsal dinner that evening, a final piece of business before the celebrations could begin. Liam arrived precisely at the appointed time. He was dressed not in a formal suit, but in a pair of dark, well-fitted trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a tailored gray blazer. He looked elegant, relaxed, and more confident than they had ever seen him. They mistook his composure for the relief of a man who had accepted his fate. He carried the same simple leather briefcase he had brought to Arthur's office. They met in Arthur's study, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with leather-bound books that looked as if they had never been opened. A fire crackled in the hearth, even though it was a mild autumn day. The atmosphere was thick with the Vance's self-satisfaction. Arthur, Isabel, and a stone-faced notary were waiting. "Liam, right on time," Arthur greeted him, gesturing towards a heavy oak desk. "Let's get this done." The notary, a man who seemed to have been selected for his complete lack of expression, laid the documents out on the desk. He pointed to the signature lines with a silver pen. "Sign here and here, initial on every page." Isabel stood beside the fireplace, watching. Her relief was palpable. The unpleasantness was almost over. Soon she would have her wedding, her handsome husband, and her secure fortune. She had successfully compartmentalized her life, just as a good businesswoman should. Liam walked to the desk. He ignored the silver pen offered by the notary and took out his own, the matte black fountain pen, the one the Vances had once silently dismissed. He uncapped it with a soft click. The sound was small, but in the quiet room it seemed unusually loud, unusually definitive. He didn't hesitate. With a steady, fluid hand, he signed his name on each line. His signature was a work of architectural precision, strong, clean, and unambiguous. He initialed each page, the nib of the pen making a faint, scratching sound on the heavy paper. When he was finished, he pushed the thick document back across the desk toward the notary. "There," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Your protection is secured." Arthur beamed, clapping him on the shoulder in a gesture of patronizing ownership. "Excellent. Now the worst is behind us. Let's have that drink." Isabel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and walked toward him, a genuine, radiant smile finally gracing her lips. "Thank you, Liam. I knew you'd understand." Liam didn't smile back. He held up a hand, a small gesture that stopped her in her tracks. He turned to his briefcase, which he had placed on a nearby chair. He clicked open the latches and pulled out a slim, leather-bound folder of his own. It was almost identical to the one that held the prenup. He placed it on the desk. "Now," he said, his voice losing its warmth and taking on a cool, businesslike edge. "For a small matter of my own." Isabel let out a light, tinkling laugh, the tension of the moment finally breaking. "What's this, Liam? Your own prenup? Don't worry, I promise not to make any claims on your drafting table or your collection of pencils." Her tone was teasing, affectionate, but still held that familiar note of condescension, the assumption that his assets were negligible, almost comical in comparison to hers. Arthur chuckled along with her. "A bit of tit for tat, eh? Fair enough. What have you got there, son? A list of your prized possessions?" Liam did not smile. His face was a mask of serene gravity. He looked from Arthur's amused expression to Isabel's smiling one, and a profound sadness washed over him. They were still playing a game they didn't understand, laughing on the edge of a cliff, completely unaware of the abyss at their feet. "It's not a prenuptial agreement," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that instantly silenced their laughter. "It's a disclosure and a courtesy." He opened the folder. The documents inside were neatly organized, tabbed with precise printed labels. He didn't hand them over, not yet. First he looked directly at Isabel, then at Arthur, and he began to speak. His voice was not angry. It was the voice of a man stating incontrovertible facts, the voice of a historian recounting a series of events that had already been set in motion. "For the past year," he began, "we have all been operating under a series of assumptions. Your assumptions about me. You assume that because I drive a modest car, I am a man of modest means. You assume that because I live in a simple apartment, it is all I can afford. You assume that because my profession, as you see it, is salt of the earth, it is not particularly lucrative." He paused, letting the words sink in. He recounted the dinner at their home, his voice flat and devoid of accusation, which only made the indictment more powerful. "You dismissed my career as a noble hobby. You pitied my contribution to our wedding, equating my life's savings to the cost of a string quartet." He then turned his gaze fully on Isabel. "You said this document, he gestured to the prenup the notary was now placing into a formal envelope, was to make it clear our marriage is about love, not money. But every action you have taken, every decision you have made has been about money, about status, about protecting what you have from a man you fundamentally misjudged. He took the top document from his folder and slid it across the polished surface of the desk. It was a single page, a consolidated statement of assets. Arthur, his amusement long gone, replaced by a wary curiosity, picked it up. Isabel leaned over his shoulder to look. At the top of the page was the name Liam Alistair Croft. Below it was a list of holdings: real estate, equity portfolios, venture capital investments, and at the bottom of the page, a single number: a net worth. Isabel's breath hitched. Arthur's face went rigid, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the page. The number was not just large, it was astronomical. It was a figure that didn't just rival the Vance family fortune, it dwarfed it by a factor of 10. Arthur looked up, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "What is this? A joke? This is absurd. It's a fantasy. You can't possibly—" "The numbers are verifiable, audited by Deloitte last quarter," Liam said calmly. "But that's not the most important part. My primary asset isn't even listed on that summary sheet. It's a private holding company." He paused, letting the silence stretch, holding Arthur's gaze. He delivered the next words with quiet, devastating precision. "The company is called Ethelred Holdings. Perhaps you've heard of it?" The color drained from Arthur Vance's face. It was as if he had been physically struck. Ethelred Holdings. The name was a phantom that had been haunting his company for months. A mysterious, aggressive, and incredibly well-capitalized investment firm that had been buying up shares of Vance Innovations on the open market. It was the ghost in his machine, the unknown entity whose actions had caused his board of directors sleepless nights. He had spent a fortune on private investigators trying to identify the principal behind Ethelred, with no success. And now that principal was sitting in his study, having just been condescendingly forced to sign away rights to a fortune that was a mere fraction of his own. Isabel was lost. She looked from her father's ashen face to Liam's calm one, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. "Ethelred? The company that's been trying to buy us out? What does that have to do with anything, Liam? Did you work for them?" The idea that Liam could be the owner was so far beyond her realm of comprehension that her mind couldn't even form the thought. Liam's gaze was fixed on Arthur, the man who had called him son while treating him like a servant. "Ethelred Holdings has not been trying to buy you out, Arthur," Liam corrected him gently. "It has been succeeding." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "As of 9:42 a.m. yesterday, Ethelred Holdings completed its acquisition of a 51% controlling stake in Vance Innovations. The transaction was finalized through a series of shell corporations and offshore accounts you were never going to trace. The board was formally notified of the change in majority ownership this morning via their legal counsel. I believe the official press release is scheduled to go out to the markets tomorrow morning to avoid any disruption during today's trading session." Silence. A complete, devastating, suffocating silence. The only sound was the crackle of the fire, which now seemed to be mocking the cold dread that had descended upon the room. The notary sat frozen, his hand hovering over the signed prenup, suddenly realizing he was a witness to something far more significant than a marriage contract. Liam's voice, when he spoke again, was soft, almost sorrowful. "So when I signed this document," he gestured to the prenup, "waiving all claim to your family's assets, I did so with a full and clear understanding of its meaning. I have no need for your assets, because as the majority shareholder and new chairman of the board of your company, Arthur, your assets, your salary, your very position are, in a practical sense, already under my stewardship." He finally turned his gaze to Isabel. Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mouth was slightly agape, her eyes wide with a horror that was just beginning to dawn. The entire foundation of her world, her identity, her sense of superiority, had been pulverized in the space of 2 minutes. "You wanted to protect yourself," Liam said, his voice laced with a tragic irony. "You wanted to build a wall between your life and a man you thought was beneath you. Isabel, you have spent the last year insulting, demeaning, and humiliating the man who, as of yesterday morning, signs your paycheck. And yours, Arthur." Just as Arthur's shock began to curdle into apoplectic rage, his mouth opening to let out what would surely be a roar of denial, the door to the study opened without a knock. A man stepped in, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit that radiated quiet authority. It was David Chen. He held a tablet in his hand. David nodded respectfully to Liam, completely ignoring the stunned Vances. "Liam, sorry to interrupt. The wire transfers are complete. The board has confirmed receipt of the transition documents and the new shareholder directives. They are awaiting your formal address, which we've scheduled for Monday morning." He paused, then finally acknowledged Arthur, his expression cool and professional. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice clipped, "I trust Liam has brought you up to speed on the change of control." The 1-2 punch was absolute. Liam's claim, which Arthur might have tried to dismiss as a monstrous bluff, was now irrevocably confirmed. The arrival of David, the calm recitation of corporate procedure, it was undeniable. It was real. The ground had not just shaken beneath their feet, it had been pulled away entirely, leaving them in a free-fall of their own making. Arthur Vance, the titan of industry, sank back into his chair, his face slack, his eyes staring into a future he no longer controlled. Isabel's world, once a fortress of certainty, had shattered into a million glittering shards. The man she was about to marry, the man she had pitied and patronized, was not the person she thought he was. He was a stranger, a king who had been masquerading as a pauper in her court. Her mind reeled, frantically trying to reprocess the last year of her life through this new, terrifying lens. Every condescending joke, every dismissive gesture, every moment of smug superiority was now reframed as a monumental, catastrophic miscalculation. Her first instinct was not logic but emotion. It was the desperate gambit of a person whose power has just been obliterated. Manipulation. Her face crumpled, the shock morphing into a mask of wounded love. Tears welled in her eyes. "Liam, darling," she whispered, taking a step toward him, her hand outstretched. Is this a joke? It's a test, isn't it? A horribly elaborate, cruel test to see if I truly loved you for you." Her voice trembled, a performance of profound hurt. "You can't be serious. I love you. We're getting married tomorrow." Liam looked at her, and for the first time she saw not the gentle, accommodating man she thought she knew, but a stranger with eyes as old and unflinching as granite. The warmth was gone, replaced by a deep, immovable sorrow. "No, Isabel," he said, his voice devoid of malice but stripped of all affection. "This was your test, not mine. Love doesn't require a prenuptial agreement designed to humiliate the other person. Love requires respect, and in all the time we have known each other, you have never once shown me that." His words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She flinched. Arthur, meanwhile, was undergoing his own rapid transformation. The stunned patriarch was being replaced by the pragmatic, cornered businessman. His mind, trained for decades in crisis management, was scrambling for leverage, for an angle, for a way out. He saw the abyss opening before his company, his legacy. He had to close it. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, attempting to reclaim some semblance of his former authority. "Son," he began, the word now sounding hollow and absurd. "Let's all just take a breath. Let's be reasonable. There has been a terrible misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication." He walked around the desk, trying to create an atmosphere of collaborative problem-solving. "We can tear up this ridiculous document," he said, gesturing at the prenup as if it were a distasteful object someone else had brought into the room. "It was a mistake, an overzealousness on the part of the lawyers. We can work together. You, me, as family." Liam's expression did not change. He had anticipated this pivot from arrogance to appeasement. He deployed the moral mirror, reflecting their own logic back at them. "Reasonable?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Was it reasonable to assume I was a gold digger? A threat to your fortune? Was it reasonable to subject me to a test of my character that you yourselves would never agree to? You told me, Arthur, in your own office that this was just good business. And Isabel told me our marriage should be about love, not money." He paused, letting his words fill the silent room. "I agree. Our marriage should have been about love, which is why it cannot happen. And as for business, you were right. It's just good business. You made your position clear. Now I am making mine." The finality in his tone sparked a new reaction in Isabel: anger. The panic and feigned hurt gave way to a desperate, lashing fury. It was the rage of the powerless. "You deceived me," she cried, her voice sharp and accusatory. "You lied to me for a year. You let me believe you were someone else. You watched me. You let me make a fool of myself. This is all your fault." It was a final, desperate attempt to reframe the narrative, to cast herself as the victim of his deception rather than the author of her own downfall. But the accusation fell flat, unable to find purchase against the solid wall of his integrity. "I never lied to you, Isabel," Liam stated, his voice softening again, now tinged with the wariness of a man who has explained the obvious one too many times. "I lived simply. I drove my car. I lived in my apartment. I answered every question you ever asked me honestly. You are the one who built a fantasy around me. You saw what you wanted to see, what your prejudices allowed you to see. The deception, Isabel, was entirely your own." He turned to David, who had been standing silently by the door, a silent, powerful witness. "David, please arrange for the caterers, the florist, and the venue to be notified of the cancellation. Pay any and all cancellation fees in full. I don't want any of the vendors to be harmed by this." He was already moving on, managing the fallout with a calm efficiency that further underscored his authority. Isabel stared at him, the reality finally sinking in, cold and absolute. The wedding was over. Her life as she knew it was over. Liam picked up his leather folder from the desk and placed it back in his briefcase, the quiet clicks of the latches sounding like the closing of a coffin. He stood before them, not as a vengeful conqueror, but as a judge delivering a sentence that was both just and inevitable. "The wedding is, of course, canceled," he said formally, as if closing a meeting. He then looked at Isabel, a flicker of the man she once knew in his eyes, a flicker of sadness for what might have been. "I'll have my things removed from the apartment by tomorrow evening. You should probably stay here, at the estate." Isabel let out a choked sob, a raw, desperate sound. "No, Liam, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I can fix this. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, just give me a chance." It was the first genuine, uncalculated thing she had said all morning, born of pure terror and loss. "There's nothing to fix, Isabel," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "The foundation is rotten. We can't build a marriage on a bedrock of mistrust and condescension. It would collapse." Arthur, ever the pragmatist, saw his last hope was not in saving the marriage, but in saving his career. "And the company?" he asked, his voice strained. "Vance Innovations? What are you going to do? Are you going to fire us? Destroy everything my family has built?" Liam turned to him, his expression hardening once more into that of a chairman of the board. "Unlike you, Arthur, I do not make business decisions based on personal ego or petty grievances. Vance Innovations is a fundamentally sound company with many talented, hardworking employees who deserve better leadership. Firing you and Isabel out of spite would be a disservice to them. A sliver of hope appeared in Arthur's eyes. You will both retain your positions, Liam continued, and the hope grew brighter. For now. And with those two words, the hope flickered, plunged into uncertainty. Your roles and your compensation will be subject to a comprehensive performance review. Mr. Chen will be overseeing that process starting Monday. He will be installing a new head of human resources and an independent ethics officer on the board. He wasn't finished. Furthermore, I expect a full, public apology to be issued. Not to me. I require no apology. The apology will be addressed to the employees of Vance Innovations. An apology for the corporate culture of arrogance and fear that you have cultivated. An apology for the times you have treated junior employees as personal servants. For the times you have taken credit for their work. For the times you have prioritized optics over people. Your continued employment is contingent not on your performance in the market, but on a demonstrated, genuine, and sustained change in your behavior. Not just towards me, but towards every single person you consider beneath you. It was a masterstroke. He wasn't just taking over their company, he was demanding its moral reconstruction. He was forcing them to confront the very character flaws that had led to this moment. He gave Isabel one last, long look. It was a look of profound disappointment, but also, buried deep within it, a sliver of possibility. The choice is yours, Isabel. You can learn from this. You can swallow your pride, look inward, and begin the work of becoming a person of substance. Or you can let your pride be your final downfall. You've spent your whole life curating your status. It's time you started building your character. True worth is not measured by the size of your trust fund. It's measured by your integrity. With that, he turned and walked out of the study. David Chen gave a curt nod to the stunned Vances and followed him, closing the door softly behind them, leaving Arthur and Isabel alone in the wreckage of their gilded world. The 6 months that followed were a study in quiet revolution. The name on the building still said Vance Innovations, but its soul was being rebuilt from the foundation up. Liam, as the new chairman, was a ghost in the machine. He rarely visited the office, preferring to steer the ship through David Chen and the new independent board members he had installed. His leadership was the antithesis of Arthur's. He promoted talented people from within the company, individuals who had been overlooked for years because they weren't political players. He instituted transparent salary bands and a robust mentorship program. He turned the top-floor executive dining room into a subsidized employee cafeteria. The fear that had permeated the hallways was gradually replaced by a tentative, then growing, sense of optimism and purpose. Arthur Vance was a man adrift. Stripped of his absolute authority, he was forced to collaborate, to listen, to justify his decisions to a board that no longer answered to him. In the first few weeks, he chafed against the new reality, his pride wounded. But as the months wore on, a strange thing happened. Freed from the pressure of being the infallible patriarch, he began to focus on the work itself. He rediscovered the passion for innovation that had led him to start the company in the first place. He became a surprisingly effective advisor, his decades of experience now tempered with a newfound humility. His relationship with Liam was conducted through formal, weekly video calls. It was professional, respectful, and entirely devoid of the false familiarity he had once tried to force. He was learning, slowly and painfully, to respect the man he had once so casually dismissed. Isabel's story was more complex. She did not take the path of least resistance. In the immediate aftermath, she had raged, she had despaired, and she had tried every tool in her arsenal, from legal threats to tearful late-night calls, to claw back what she had lost. Liam never took her calls. He instructed his lawyers to handle hers. Faced with a wall of implacable silence, she finally broke. She took an extended leave of absence from the company. The society pages buzzed with rumors, but for the first time in her life, Isabel didn't care. She disappeared from the galas, the charity balls, the entire glittering world she had once inhabited. She sold her flashy sports car and her penthouse apartment, which had been in her name. She moved into a small, simple flat downtown. Then she did something no one, least of all herself, could have ever predicted. She started volunteering at a soup kitchen in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. It was grueling, humbling work. She washed dishes, mopped floors, and listened to the stories of people whose lives were a universe away from her own. She saw true hardship, true resilience. Her own problems, which had once seemed so monumental, were revealed to be the trivial anxieties of the insulated. For the first time, she was valued not for her name or her looks, but for the simple act of showing up and being helpful. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to build a new identity, one based not on status, but on service. One evening, 6 months after that fateful day in the study, Liam was sitting in his own office. It was a space he had designed himself, atop a new, environmentally advanced skyscraper his firm had just completed. The view was even more spectacular than the one from Arthur's old office, but it felt different. It felt earned. On his desk was a single, handwritten letter. The envelope was simple, the handwriting elegant but unadorned. It was from Isabel. He opened it. It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was not an excuse. It was a simple, heartfelt, and deeply honest apology. Liam, it began, I have written and torn up this letter 100 times because I'm sorry feels too small for the damage I caused. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a failure of character. My character. I lived my life in a bubble, and I was so afraid of it bursting that I couldn't see anything or anyone clearly. You were right. I judged you. I tested you. And I failed to see the incredible man who was standing right in front of me. I was blind, and I am so sorry for the pain my blindness caused you. You took away my company, my status, and my future as I saw it. And in doing so, you gave me the only thing I ever truly needed, a chance to become someone better. Thank you for the painful, necessary lesson. I don't know if I deserve redemption, but I am trying, every day, to be worthy of it. I wish you nothing but happiness. Isabel. Liam folded the letter and looked out at the sprawling city below. He felt a pang of sadness for the love that had been lost, for the future that had dissolved into smoke. But he felt no bitterness. His victory had not been in their downfall, but in the possibility of their redemption. He had not become cruel or vindictive. He had held on to his integrity, and in doing so, had forced them to find their own. The vindication was not in their humiliation, but in the hope of their growth. He had proven that true strength isn't about displaying dominance, but about having the patience and character to let your actions speak for themselves. The quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. It's a powerful lesson about judging people by their character rather than by their appearances. True worth is something you build within yourself, not something you inherit. What do you think? Did Isabel's apology feel genuine? Did she deserve the second chance she was trying to create for herself, even if it wasn't with Liam? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us to look deeper. Thank you for joining us.